Good morning. I'm David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Editor for the Tennessean. And we're broadcasting live from the Tennessean on 1801 West End. These are interviews for mayoral and at-large Metro Council candidates. We have the privilege today of having Burkley Allen, who is a candidate for at-large Metro Council and has been a district council person for the last 8 years. We want to thank you for joining us. And Council Lady Burkley Allen, would you please talk a little bit about why are you running for this position?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I am running for council at large because I have served as a district council member, and it's been a great experience to be able to be involved in the change that's happening in Nashville, to be able to make things happen when people see things that need to be done. And I've worked on some citywide issues like transit and infrastructure and housing that I'd like to continue working on, and would like to be able to have the opportunity to focus on those.
One of the issues that you've been very much involved in is the short-term rental issue. And
Yes.
could you talk a little bit about the evolution of that? 'Cause that certainly has become a big issue over the last several years of where it was, your thinking behind it, and where it is today.
Absolutely. It took us all by surprise. We had some very limited and very specific regulations about historic bed and breakfast homestays that had been very carefully vetted and had some pretty specific requirements about what those properties were required to do. And then suddenly there was this new thing that had just entered the market. So we looked at what other cities had done and tried to decide what works best for Nashville, and made a first attempt. We learned a lot from that one. There were some things that made sense and some other things that ended up having some unintended consequences that no one could have anticipated. When we went from having a handful to 200 by the time the first regulations were done, to thousands, that just has a different implication. So we've evolved in what we've allowed and are continuing to make changes even today. There will be an item on the council agenda on Tuesday night dealing with kind of further trying to tweak this as we see how it impacts just life in the neighborhoods and the tourist industry and how it all fits together.
Now, you mentioned tourism and neighborhoods in the same sentence, and that's
Right.
often become a point of contention, one versus the other. How do you see the situation in terms of tourism versus neighborhoods?
I mean, that affects everything that's happening in Nashville right now. So specifically with regard to short-term rental, I think there are certainly many neighbors who feel like it's an imposition on the neighborhoods to have people they don't know come in there. I mean, I think as Nashville continues to grow, neighborhoods can't always count on knowing every single person on the street, and that's something we've been used to. Having our kids run up and down the streets together, and that's a change that's not always welcome or easy. And so I think people certainly feel like there's a benefit to having some control over how that happens, or if, how many houses that it applies to. So we're looking at, and we had always had a limit on the number of properties that wouldn't be occupied by the owner who was running it as short-term rental, and in the single-family homes. And now we're looking at trying to make some additional tweaks to multifamily, which is like apartments, condos, and townhomes.
Yeah, one of the things that I often hear out in the community is, how is it that Nashville's booming so much yet we're having problems balancing our budget? And from your standpoint as a council person who recently voted in the budget issue, why is that? Why are we in this position?
Such a good question. Probably I could give a half-hour-long answer on that one. I think part of the issue is several things took us by surprise as we were planning the budget 2 years ago. We had assumed that the growth could kind of carry everything when the opportunity came up after the reappraisal to set the tax rate at a way that would be revenue neutral as required by state law, but also give the city its inflation adjustment, which we also need to have. And that was not done at that particular time, possibly because we were looking at a transit referendum that was considering raising sales tax. So we don't want to hit people with two different tax increases at the same time. And as we know, the transit referendum showed that we're not ready for that step yet either. So which further puts more cost on the city running our bus system. So that was a cost we thought was going to be shifted, or at least some of that cost would be shifted. There were more appeals to the reappraisal than had been historically done. So the amount of revenues coming in at the tax rate that we set were $25 million lower than what we had calculated based on good historical data in a way that had worked in the past. So that was just this strange growth has made everything different. And several other factors happened with schools, with school funding, the number of students, so that we were required to put more money into schools. And those are all important things that we have to fund. So that was kind of the beginning of having a little bit of a squeeze. I'll say the one thing that has done is made every department look at every penny they spend. And I think that they have worked really hard to be efficient, which is good. So I don't think it's right to say that our current problem is because there's a lot of waste in the government. I think there's a lot of growth in Nashville, and we have added to services. We now spend $30 million a year on building sidewalks as opposed to the 8 that we used to in the not too distant past, and that's important. People everywhere are begging for more sidewalks. We've allocated more money for affordable housing, and that's an issue that comes up in every conversation I have, is just how can we make sure that there's housing for the people who are making Nashville run. It's not people who aren't working. It's the servers, it's the musicians, it's the teachers, the firefighters, nurses. I mean, that's all important. So we've allocated more funding for that. We've allocated more funding for public safety, largely related to some community oversight board, body cameras. I mean, things that the community has very strongly stated that they feel that we need, but it costs more. So our costs have continued to increase even as we have not made a simple inflation adjustment. So I think we will need to continue to be sure that we're spending our money well. I think we need to be very thoughtful about any new capital expenditures, because that adds to our debt service. And debt service has become a larger portion of our budget than it used to be. And there are two ways to fix that. One is to grow the budget by growing our revenues. And the other is to just be a little more careful about deciding that we're going to do future projects. And that's a tough one, because everybody wants their library improved, or their community center built, or the school renovated in their area, and those are all important things to do. So we'll have to find the balance point there on that.
Now, at this point, budget-wise, there's a situation where the under one roof plan of Lemaire is going to cost the city some $500 million. Some of that is going to be general obligation bonds. There's the issue of balancing the budget on a parking solution that hasn't been approved yet by the council, and property sales of public land. What is your position on those things? How do you see that holistically, and is that sustainable? Is that sustainable for the Nashville?
Right, so really good question. So let's break that down into 3 things. So the under one roof plan is $500 million over 10 years. So that's $50 million per year. And we do need to look at it in the context of the budget. I think we also need to look at it in the context of what are the other costs that we are going to be spending if we don't do this, in emergency room visits, in police. I mean, the solution to people having a stable life is a stable place to live. And when they have a stable life, they can get a job and access the healthcare system through clinics and other ways, and be productive citizens as opposed to ending up under. So it's a mixed bag, and we have to look at that holistically, I think. The sale of public property everyone agrees that that's not good long-term fiscal policy. And so I think as a council, we have committed to not doing that in the future. There were several items in past budgets that counted on that, and the council evaluated each one very carefully on its own merits. Is this particular piece of property something that Metro should be holding on to? And in the end, there were some that we voted down the option to sell, and said this is close to parks, it's covered with trees, it's a hilltop, it would be hard to develop anyway, we're not going to sell it. There was another case where it was an old abandoned school the building was in terrible condition, it wasn't a good location for a school, and we let that one go. And so we picked and chose on that, and allowed some of those sales to happen for last year's budget, but have made a statement and passed legislation that says that's not part of our future method of funding. So I think that in the long run, we will need to come up with making sure that our expenditures are matched with real revenues that we really can count on a recurring basis. And you finally asked about the parking solution. That we currently get $1 million a year in revenue from parking. And the purpose of having revenue from parking is that meters allow us to some degree to control where parking is available for businesses, so that rather than having someone come in and park 8 hours a day in front of a store while they go someplace else and don't park in a parking garage, that can be turnover for customers. So there's a reason, just from a how does Nashville work standpoint, to have some type of parking revenues. But it's not because the city is depending on that revenue to balance our budget. It's because it's an important part of making downtown and some of the other little commercial areas like Hillsborough Village that I represent. So I think that our current system of parking control, as it were, or can work much better. And perhaps as a city, we can figure out how to do it by looking at other cities. There are other cities who have hired experts to do that for them and have gone through this same process that we looked at of having them buy the equipment that it takes to change out the meters that we have currently. My understanding is that we would continue to own that system. We would continue to have the traffic and parking department and the traffic and parking commission, which is a community input process, be in charge of where rates are raised, and that's how it currently is. So I think that many of the concerns people had were due simply to a lack of good information. I think it was very smart to pull that out of the budget process because there was just too much miscommunication happening. And so I look forward to the renewed conversation about how do we make Nashville's parking work more effectively and what that would look like, and whether we invite a private contractor to help us do that more effectively, let them have the front end cost of buying all that equipment, and then have a 50-50 sharing arrangement. I think that was what was looked at. So it has the potential to be good. I think it needs to be a much more open process where people can understand what's going on and get comfortable with what's being proposed, and also to be compared with the economics of what if we just make changes to our own department. Well, we got to make changes.
Sure. The council a few months ago passed the Do Better bill about transparency with regard to economic development incentives. There's been a lot of discussion at mayoral forums about whether or not we need to do incentives anymore, given the prosperity of Nashville right now. What is your philosophy at this moment on what should we do in the future about delivering incentives, and how should they be reported?
They should absolutely be reported. We have become much more open about reporting past programs. So now you can go on the Nashville Data website, if you know where to dig, and see what incentives have we given in the past, which ones have played out, which ones are still costing us $500,000 a year or whatever, and when do they run out. So I think number one, just having that information available is important. If you add up simply the tax increment financing and payment in lieu of taxes, those are the tax incentives that we have given in the past. Those come to about $23 million a year that it's costing us. That's about 1% of our budget. And we haven't done those in the past couple of years. We've done a couple of job incentives where we simply pay for jobs when they actually happen. I think, and those were only used for 2 companies that were bringing a large amount of jobs that pay decent wages. And circle back to the other issues we were talking about earlier, is the way to increase prosperity is to have people who are able to work really good jobs that pay well, and making those available. So part of that all fits together as part of the picture. As you say, Nashville is such an attractive place. We're seeing an awful lot of great jobs, not necessarily in that number in one company, but a lot of stuff is coming to us. So I absolutely think that we've got to be very, very judicious in offering any future ones. There's certainly no appetite in the public for us to do any more. And it has been harder and harder to justify to people why we've done it. In each one of those, we get an economic study at the beginning that says, based on the way we've done this in the past, we expect these many jobs to generate this much sales tax and this much property tax, and in the end, we make more money than we give. And if you look at it from a strictly economic standpoint, that seems like a win for Nashville. But certainly the public perception is that we're giving money away and we're losing money. And I have asked both the Chamber of Commerce and the Mayor's Office of Economic Development, if we ever come back with one of these, I want to see a report on what actually has happened. Show me that is actually how it's played out. If you're going to ask me to do this again, and I hope they don't. It's just people don't like it, so it would be better to say, just come to Nashville. It's a great place to work. You don't need incentives. But if we do feel like we begin to lose all the opportunities, and then we have to play the same game that other cities are doing, I think we need really good data that shows that yes, in the past, we've given out X number of dollars and we've gotten back 2X. And that's enabled us to spend money on the things we care about, like teachers and improving schools and building parks and libraries and things.
Hillsborough Village is a microcosm for a lot of Nashville's prosperity, and I think about you've got the revitalization of the Belcourt Theater. You've also got the situation in construction that closed down Fido recently, and also a bookstore that is closed and so forth. And so looking at that, what are some of the main concerns that you're hearing from business owners and residents about what they want you to do, what they want you to accomplish over these next 4 years?
I mean, one of the biggest things is how do we keep the wonderful character of Nashville? And part of that, I think, is generated by our local small businesses, you know, that are owned by people that have been here for you know, ages and ages, that contribute to not anywhere USA. And that's something that, as you say, Hillsborough Village is a great example of that. Fido is back in business, I will just say, and it's a treasured business because it's unique. And it caters to the local needs, and it's a local owner who we all know. And you know, there are other restaurants that are fine, but they're run out of other states, and they're a chain, and you walk inside of them, and you can be in any other city in the country. So you know, certainly those provide jobs, and they're good. But the big issue that we grapple with is how can we create a good environment where our small local businesses can continue to thrive, and part of that is just trying to figure out rents are going to continue to go up, and that's part of what's driving out the local businesses. So are there other incentives we can offer in a way that's fair and equitable? Other cities have some guidelines we can go by. Some of them are restrictive and they may have unintended consequences, like defining chains and saying you just can't be here. That's got its own set of challenges. So that's something I haven't seen any easy answers to. But it's absolutely something that comes up a lot, and something that we've got to continue to look for solutions on and study what other cities are doing it well.
Sure, it's interesting. Growth, depending on who you talk to, is either good or really bad, depending on what you hear. I was driving along Dickerson Pike yesterday, and that Dive Motel, which is going to be redeveloped, and on the one hand, it's exciting. On the other hand, you talk about character and community, and what happens to the community when you have that major revitalization, because we don't have a very good track record of keeping people together of mixed incomes here in Nashville, and maybe across the country too. Do you think there are any good solutions or anything that you think about of how do you get people to play, work? I mean, is it possible to do that, to have a place where mixed income is a possibility?
I think so. I mean, I think we didn't pay attention for many years, and I think the original zoning laws kind of created a mechanism for spreading people into different categories and then separating them geographically, which has had so many negative consequences. And so now that we're sort of waking up to what a bad idea that was, I think there are the specific mechanisms in place for the whole Envision Napier process is very intentionally geared toward mixed income. And they're working from the bottom up and saying, let's bring in workforce housing and market rate housing into the subsidized housing as well, and then deconcentrate poverty, which is great, and then also show people what success looks like, and I think also offer people an option to see how hardworking folks are in subsidized housing, so that that we have no idea what people who live in other parts of town, how their lives are. And actually, we all have the same hopes and dreams, I think, and mixing us together is, I think, is a great part of that. And historically, I mean, if you go back to the very beginning of the last century, I mean, it wasn't that uncommon for people of all professions to live on a street together. So it's not that it's never happened before. We just somehow pushed ourselves away from it, and I think we're beginning to come back to that. The mayor's Housing Incentive Pilot Program, HIP, is a small subsidy program that is enabling certain new developments to specifically set aside a couple of units and say we'll help a couple of people who meet income qualifications to live in this apartment that is renting for $2,000 a month, which is not necessarily attainable if you're just barely making minimum wage. But if they qualify, then this HIP program will make up the difference, and they can live. For example, I've got one on West End that's right on the transportation corridor. You can jump on the number 3 bus, which, as you know, is one of the best, and go straight downtown every 15 minutes. So it's a great access to living in an area of opportunity with great transit possibilities. And from what I can tell, it's working really well, and I'm thrilled to have that in my district, and I think there are several other possibilities that are coming. So that's just a small piece. I mean, I think part of it is having those pilots out there to show people this works, people do great together, and I think it will possibly become something that happens by the private developers as well. But we've got to show them some examples that this can work.
Now, you mentioned zoning, and that's one of the powers that a council member has here in Nashville. Now, there's been a lot of talk in other cities like Minneapolis, which just decided to end single-family zoning only, and California has talked about it, it's tabled it for now. Do you think something like that would work in Nashville, or should work, in terms of the way you just to basically say we're going to remove a whole area of zoning to create more density?
Nashville went through, I guess the short answer to that is not exactly. So Nashville went through a very long and open and extensive community planning process. Every 20 years we have to redo our general plan, and I think you got here right as we were finishing that up. So in 2015 we came forth with Nashville Next, our 20-year vision for how Nashville is going to grow. And basically, you know, the planning folks set us down at tables with maps and gave us little monopoly, things, and said, you know, all these people are coming every day and their new jobs, and you put these little things on the maps where you think they should go. And it was a bunch of them. So we had to find a lot of places to put them. And the beginning of the conversation was people who lived in the rural areas said, y'all will never notice a few more people, you know, stick them downtown in your little crowded neighborhoods. And we were going, y'all have lots of room out there, put it out there, you'll never notice another house. And so everybody was kind of starting from the NIMBY, which is a difficult place to get anything done. And after some guided conversation, we all went, you know, the rural areas are a treasure and a valuable asset. And the mature neighborhoods are an important part of Nashville. But density is something we're going to have to do. And if we put it on the corridors where people can get quick access to, at this point, our buses, and we can make those work better, then that's you know, allowing more people to be here without necessarily adding more cars to the road because they're not getting any wider. And then we put the businesses also on those corridors or downtown, then we can connect those. So that's what we've all agreed to as a city. And I think it's a good plan. The transportation part of it is something that we haven't been able to keep up with, making its capacity match all the people that have come. And I think that's what generates so much concern about, you know, not putting, you know, barring the gates and telling people we're not ready for them yet, don't come.
Yeah, that's a good point, because when I read through Nashville Next, you know, people in the community process at least said, we do want that massive comprehensive transit system, and here it came, and it was soundly defeated.
It was.
Yeah.
And I think we'll just have to go back and start that process over again. I mean, it was a very intentional community engagement process. They worked really hard to get everybody they thought who mattered, and they listened to the statement, which was, we want a big plan and we want it to be comprehensive and go out to all the counties. But you know, the devil's in the details, and once you finally spell it all out there, then there were you know, different people who thought it was too big or thought it wasn't big enough, or had the concerns of the effects that it would have on housing. And between those three groups, for each of different reasons, I think that was why it was so soundly defeated. But all those groups care, and I think trying to figure out how we can get their input as well, and say, all right, here's the big plan, and let's step through it incrementally. And we're starting already with improving the bus system. So there's traffic signalization pieces that are happening already on Murphy Road. And I've had somebody tell me that she's followed the bus and it works wonderfully now. So I think that's exciting to see that stuff beginning to happen. But we've got to, I think, get folks comfortable with, or have a common vision that we feel like almost everybody's on board with. And then I think we move forward incrementally from there. And try, you know, if we can do one corridor and have people go, oh wow, that one's working so much better than everything else, let's do the next one. And you know, we can work around to all the I think we had 5 that were going to be light rail and some that were going to be bus rapid transit. But to take it one at a time, show some successes, and then take it from there, knowing that it all fits into a big plan. I think that process can work.
Yeah, on the issue of scooters, that
kind
of transit, I mean, for those who are watching who may not be watching live, you know, we've broadcast this on July 1st. On July 2nd, the council will be taking up a vote on scooters. Could you explain what that is and where your thoughts are on the scooter
That's
issue?
a complicated one. So, I mean, scooters were introduced not that long ago and seem to have the potential to be part of our mobility solution. And we've learned already now that this whole shared economy can be tricky. So we set up regulations as a pilot project and said we'll evaluate this along the way. And again, when there were a few scooters, it was working fairly well. And then as there got to be more and more people who were not riding responsibly, That's probably the second biggest thing I hear from people is, I nearly got knocked down by a scooter, or I saw a scooter nearly get hit by a car. So there's some real important safety issues that are not currently being addressed effectively. And we've had numerous conversations with the different operating companies. And my attitude essentially is, it is going to have to be their problem to solve. That they've got the technology and the communication with their customers, and if they can figure out how to make it matter to the customers that they're not riding responsibly and make it stop quickly, then I think this could work. And interestingly, that conversation has been accelerated tremendously by the proposal to pull them all off the street. So if doing that has gotten the companies to get really earnest about fixing the issues, then I think that statement has produced the kind of results that we're going to have. You know, the questions will be, do we take them all off? Do we take half of them off? Do we give them a 90-day period to come up with a request for proposals to come back in a limited fashion where we can control how many there are and where we've got really good guarantees that they will make sure that their riders are riding responsibly. So we'll be working our way through some of those how's the best way to do this questions tomorrow, and I'm still studying that. So
Very good.
when I finish this interview, I'll go back and read on that one some more.
Well, in the final minutes of this interview, tell our viewers why they should vote for you and how to get in touch with you or read more about you if they're curious about getting to know you.
Thank you. Well, I would love for people to give me their vote as council member at large, because I've got 8 years of experience as an engineer. I'm very methodical, but I'm also collaborative, and I think it's important to listen to all sides because there are a lot of great ideas that come in, and Nashville has a lot of very complicated issues that that kind of experience and good relationships and collaborative approach can help solve. And I am eager to put that to work, and folks can reach me at burkley.org. You just have to spell my name right, burkley.org. And I would love to hear from people.
Very good. Well, we want to thank our viewers. We want to thank especially Council Lady Burkley Allen, who is here talking about her campaign. We'll be doing this for the next 3 days. And remember, it's July 2nd is the deadline to register to vote. You can go vote on ovr.govote.tn.gov. And make sure your voice is your vote. Early voting starts on July 12th. And thank you very much.
Thank you, David. My pleasure.